Hello again. We've got a very interesting sword here to look at. This is from the 1700s, and it was described as an 18th century trade blade. Now, the curators presenting this didn't mean that as in this was a sword used as currency, although it could have been, right? It could have been traded for anything. What they specifically meant was that it got retrofitted and retooled as it passed through many different sets of hands. Taking a look at the blade there, you can see it's sturdy. I mean, this thing looks like it was meant to be used despite the level of decoration. It's a broad blade, used for chopping motions. It does have a functional point as well. This doesn't help give away the origin at all. We're guessing when it comes to the origin, and the decorations, more than the shape of the blade, are what we're going to look to for clues there. Speaking of that decoration, here is the most noticeable part, of course. Really beautiful handle. Dark woods set off by those light spots, which then match some of the work there on the, on the cross guard. So nicely done. This was not a poor man's weapon, and the handle would seem to indicate kind of a, Indo-Persian, Near Eastern origin for sure. But again, I don't really know exactly what it represents at all, and neither do the owners of it. As long as we're on the handle, we'll talk about the guard there. It's functional. Could go further back, of course. It doesn't produce an actual, knuckle duster type guard, but it gives you some serious protection up on the top as well. And you can see, again, this is kind of hefty. Look at the join there where the blade meets, this is meant to stay in place. A lot of swords from where we're assuming this came from were not riveted in place. So you'll notice the handles didn't have, like pins that go through to secure the blade on the inside. It's probably more that the tang, the part of the blade that, the metal of the blade that we cannot see, is actually just stuck into the handle. They're kind of like a gummy but very strong mixture. So let's take a look at the blade here. It's aged pretty well. It looks great. This is, again, 1700s. There's a lot more swords from the 1800s. A lot easier to find than one this old. And you can see that fuller there, right? It's got a strong fuller. That's that ridge there on the top. It's on both sides. Quick recap, that helps lighten a sword while not losing strength, and it runs about 2/3 of the way down the length. So the idea, my thought is, the idea behind that is it tapers off so that way the chopping end, if kind of considered a machete again, that top slicing end is flatter and doesn't have this kind of ridge. And now you're going to see what's really interesting about the blade. It has a lot of decorations on it. Some are better than others. This one here, it's not overly impressive. It's not high art by any stretch, but then again, you don't see things like this on swords all the time. I don't know what those spirals represent. The asterisks are probably stars, so I'm guessing something celestial, and you'll see why in just a sec. And that's why, right? So the sun looks much better than those spirals, and it, again, doesn't give much of a clue as to origin, but, kind of reminds me of late Renaissance manuscripts and really anything from that era where you see that kind of thing drawn, like in the, German Wonder Book and things like that. So there is that, and there's going to be more of that kind of celestial motif, but you'll see it's not the only one at all, which makes you wonder, is this thing just kind of cumulatively decorated, I don't think this thing was made with these, on there originally. I think it's almost like a graffiti sword, so it's hard to tell, which designs came when. And I think that was part of what the people who own this were talking about in terms of it trading hands a lot. Alright, and moving on, right, there's plenty more to see along this blade. We've got this figure here. So again, the level of art is not too high. He looks like a cyclops, but nevertheless, it's an important clue because, again, you can kind of see some, vague features and whatnot. His headgear is interesting. What they said was that this was probably, I'm going to butcher this name, Aurangzeb, who was basically considered the last effective emperor of the Mughal Empire or Federation from India. So he essentially ruled India, or very large parts of it, during the late 1600s. And we've got even more, because here's a moon, which reminds me of, the same style as the sun, and I'm sure it's by the same person. And you notice the eyes are those same spirals, so maybe all of those elements come from the same person, and maybe all of them do. But anyway, I like the kind of, again, that late Renaissance graffiti style look to the sun and the moon, and that ends the, the blade decorations. One thing in this view you can see is the tang just jutting into the hilt right there on the left. So I think that's nice to get an idea of how that actually works. And then back to the martial arts, because this is a weapon. So you can see the point here. Again, this is a slashing blade, but that point could certainly be used for thrusting. It's not designed to pierce through armor or anything like that. Again, it's that kind of real broad machete-style blade. Now, sometimes you'll get a slashing blade like that, and it's flexible as well. This one is not. This is a sturdy blade, so it's somewhere there in the middle, and has enough rigidity to be used for thrusting, but the overall shape still implies that broad slashes were the favored technique. And here's a look at the entire blade, or at least the best I could do, and this will give you a better idea of, what those etchings look like when you take the whole thing in. And as you can see, it's a long sword, and this is not a short sword at all, and unfortunately the scabbard has been lost to time, because it'd be interesting to see what kind of decorations that had on it and how it matched. Probably the handle would be my guess. So to finish off, we'll go back to the handle, because that's the piece de resistance, right? I'm going to take the experts who own this at their word that the overall design is a result of accumulation, right? Different features getting added. Maybe the blade got retrofitted onto a different handle, something like that. Those things did happen often. We kind of look at old or ancient weapons and imagine that they were always built exactly as seen. And if you think about how expensive they were and how much work it took, actually there's plenty of times that you would take an old blade and stick a new handle on it, or some new fittings, that kind of thing. And this appears to be an example of that kind of process. So that is the 18th century trade blade. Thank you.